Hey guys, T-Bowler. Today I got an Erich Bey build guide for you here. I got a lot of requests to go over this guy. So if you're new to these build guides, typically what I do is go over the ship's strengths and weaknesses, then we'll go over the perks, and then the inspirations that you can choose from. So Erich Bey, in my opinion, is the better gunboat commander, and Von Spee is the better torpedo boat commander. You can use these German destroyers in either manner, but I prefer Bay. I prefer using them as gunboats personally, and we'll kind of tailor these builds to that, so keep that in mind. Also, another note, the Gaidi and the Z23 have two different options for guns. I use the 150s, which is the upgraded one, but they do have 128s, I believe, which is that comes with the ship, and they're faster firing, lower damage, lower fire chance. So keep that in mind. But that's just how I kind of set up my ships, and that's the underlying philosophy that I play these in. So what I like to do is compare the tier 5, 6, and 7 tech tree ships of each nation. Look for strengths, look for weaknesses. Those are the ships I like to play. If you like to play lower tiers, you'd probably want to look at those lower tier ships and compare them, because there's quite a bit of variability as you go up the lines. But those are the tiers that I'm focused in when I'm doing these. And looking first at the Gaidi, best HP at its tier. In fact, all three of these destroyers have the highest HP for their tier. Gaidi has the highest HE damage slash fire chance. Again, that's with the 150s. Highest AP damage at the tier, and it's the fastest. Weaknesses, shortest firing range, fairly bad turret traverse, worst at the tier, and worst at the tier turn radius and rudder shift. So a little bit of issues with mobility, but very strong gun stats. Looking at the Moss, you don't have the options, you just have the 128. So the best at the it's best at the tier in terms of HP and AP damage, and worse in terms of turret first again and turn radius and rudder shift. So that one's a little bit more middle of the pack. Z23, again, with the upgraded guns, you have the highest HP at the tier, highest HE damage slash fire chance, highest AP damage, best torp reload speed, and the best ship speed. Worst for the tier, it has, again, the worst turret traverse, worst torp damage, and the worst turn radius slash rudder shift. Now, looking at the torps, in general, they're fairly fast in the water. They tend to have shortish range. They're all kind of middle of the packs. Damage-wise, the first two, the Gaidi and the Moss, are better than the Mayhan and the Benson, but the Fletcher, when you get the upgraded torps, has better torpedo damage than the Z23. So I don't personally put a lot of stock in the torps on these ships. I mean, they're usable, they're not horrible, so you can put together builds with those in mind. But if you're planning on focusing on the torpedoes, again, I would try and build the build around Von Spee instead of Bay. That's my personal opinion there. So, kind of common strengths and weaknesses. The guns tend to perform very well. Obviously, a lot of HP and pretty good speed. And then the common detractions of the line are kind of mobility in terms of turning, and the turret traverse is quite a bit of a problem. So, Erich Bey's base trait, we'll go over the inspirations more later on in the video, but he increases the concealment of the destroyer, so that's kind of baked into the build. And here's how I have him set up. Again, this is with guns. Oh, I did forget to mention the sonar. The sonar is the best at the tier in terms of detectability and how fast you can cycle through it. So currently we have the UK lines and the German lines equipped with sonar, and in my opinion and according to the stats, the German sonar is the better. So that's also a common strength across the board to keep in mind when we're looking at these builds. Now, perk number one, the options: you can increase the travel speed of torpedoes. Currently I have that max, so you can get up to 4 knots, which would actually, that looks like it would make them pretty much the fastest. I mean, not factoring in other destroyer commander builds, but just comparing the base traits. Usually the speeds, they're Actually, they're the fastest than the Gady and the Moss. I forgot to mention that. So this could definitely impact the effectiveness of the torpedoes, and I wouldn't rule this one out. That's actually a pretty good one. And if you put it on, by the way, the Z-23s would be the fastest in the water too. I currently use this one. Cutting down the reload time, that's kind of the main thing for me here. The Gaiety and the Z-23, kind of slowish reload times due to the higher caliber guns. Using this kind of mitigates that. Increasing the torpedo visibility always kind of helps. So the German destroyers are going to be dueling other destroyers. Kind of the two main roles are cap contention for domination mode. I think this is the best line of ships to perform that role. Hunting out the destroyers. Like in a straight up gunfight against the USN destroyer, both ships parked 5 kilometers away, no consumables, just firing at each other. The USN would win, but if you factor in the consumable play, the German destroyers are arguably the strongest destroyer hunters in the game, depending on how you play them. So I like to cut down the reload time, increasing the torpedo visibility range. That's going to help with those close destroyer encounters. Cutting down the rudder shift is a bit of a detriment. Now on Monday when we get the update, some of these negatives are going to be adjusted. So if you watch this in the future, take note of these numbers and factor that in. Again, this is maxed, so it adds 10% to the rudder shift, which doesn't help. But I'm kind of playing these ships as they're not particularly that mobile in terms of the turning anyways, so hurting it a little bit more. Not the end of the world, but you can make a strong case for both of these. Tier number 2, this was the most interesting one for me going into the line before it was launched. Initially I was going to use this listen closely perk, which adds 2 sonar charges, cuts down the duration, cuts down the reload, so you can cycle through them a lot more. And I figured I'd be using this quite a bit, just to kind of use other destroyer smokes against them and use my own smokes, and combining the smokes with the sonar is a very dangerous combo. And this is certainly a viable option. I would definitely try it out. I didn't find that I ended up liking this as much just because, for various reasons. I mean, the opportunity to use 4 sonar successfully in a given game didn't arise very often for me, whereas 2 felt pretty comfortable, so I didn't really end up getting enough opportunities to use more than 2 charges, I guess, for me to merit using this one. Look at me now. This one I've actually used about 75% of the time with my Erich Bey build, and definitely a strong option. Detectability is decent. I mean, I think it tends to come in second behind the Japanese, again, uninfluenced by other commander builds. So using this can help. You can actually turn these into fairly stealthy destroyers if you want to spec them out that way. But because I have Bey, and you'll see I have Swirsky over there, a little bit of a spoiler alert, I already have kind of a stealth build, so pulling back from that a little bit, this adds to the detectability of 5%, but adding 5% to the HE damage and AP damage at the current level, and we're only half there. You can get 10% to each of those, and again, currently the penalty is 5% to your detectability. But like I mentioned, the penalties will be adjusted here. We don't know which ones or how dramatically. But this one, increasing the damage of the guns, which is already kind of the highlight for 2/3 of these ships. And I put a little bit of an extra weight on tier 7 just because that's my preferred tier I like to play the most. So that one to me just kind of takes the cake. And again, I can go either way between these. I'm not going to say this is wrong, but currently I'm using Mortar for perk number 3, or perk number 2, sorry. Perk number 3, reducing the torpedo reload time. Again, not bad, but I'm not focusing as much on the torps. They're not impressive enough for me to really build around the torps with the line. And again, Erich Bey we're mainly focusing on. It's a hybrid ship, but I consider it leaning more towards the gunboat end of the spectrum. So especially with this build, I'm more focused on the guns. Now here we can increase the range of the guns. Secondary range, I mean, if there's even secondaries on these ships, who would notice, but that's not important. Increasing the range of your main gun's decent. You know, you could consider that as an option. But for me, this one really stands out. If you have the option for this twist and track, which has the radio location, it basically points you to the closest ship, which is usually going to be a destroyer. Again, my kind of philosophy playing these destroyers is I want to be hunting other destroyers. And if you're speccing out a build with the intention to hunt other destroyers, twist and track is extremely valuable to get. It'll give you the upper hand closing in on ships that don't really know exactly where you are. You can have a pretty good idea where they are. If they sneak off and kind of get away, you can hunt them down a lot easier with this. And by the way, it helps the turret traverse, which is, as we noted, a common problem with this line. So not only did you get the valuable radio location perk, but you do get a little bit of a reduction on the turret traverse, which is nice. Perk number 4, this one might be interesting. We'll see if this one gets buffed when the negatives are reduced. But engine boost reload time, not the end of the world. Again, these are already very fast ships. My thinking is the smokes are really quite poor, you know, in terms of the full duration smoke charges, i.e. not including the UK line of destroyers. The Germans have the worst in terms of deployment time, dispersion time, which is how long the clouds are puffing. So small clouds, small deployment time. This one's just going to help boost it a little bit, you know, kind of take a little bit of the edge off of that negative on the line. So neither of these are really groundbreaking in my mind, but this one seems to be a little bit better. And the legendary, currently this one's broken. I don't know if or when they're going to fix it, but it's not supposed to. You can see it says at the highest mastery level you gain reduced mobility with disabled engine. Currently that works at any level. I mean, reducing the engine repair time to me isn't that big of a deal, but that the gaining reduced mobility with the disabled engine, which allows you to still sail when your engine's disabled, I mean, that is quite valuable. So until they fix this one, if they ever do, I would just go ahead with this one. Gaining a little XP here at the cost of speed, not a big deal. Again, we already have really good HP. Now you can make the argument, because you have such a high relative value of HP to begin with, these percentage boosts to that are going to provide a better or a bigger benefit to the German destroyers than others, which is true. I mean, I wouldn't say Leviathan is a horrible one, but right now, because you automatically have mobility with a disabled engine at any level, this one's currently the stronger of the two. But if it gets fixed, then you could strongly consider this one. So let's look at the perks, and then we'll take a look at some of the inspirations here. Alright, so looking at the inspirations now. First thing, base trait for Bey, very strong. This is one that I'm planning on maxing Bey next, because I use him as an inspiration on all my destroyers currently. Reduces the detectability of destroyers. Now I do have Swirsky, which we'll talk about, but anytime a perk says it impacts destroyer, cruiser, battleship, and then you compare it to a guy like Swirsky that says increase concealment of your ship, the class-specific one, in this case the destroyer, is always going to have a better increase per level than the kind of neutral across the tier one. So if you're just going to pick Bey or you're just going to pick Swirsky and they're at the same level, Bey is going to have better concealment. So you have that baked in with this one. That's a very strong perk for any destroyer, but because you have 3 options for traits. You have your own ships or your own commanders, and then you have 2 inspirations at level 11. Now, sometimes the base trait of the commander you're using is good, sometimes not. When it's good, that's kind of a bonus, because I consider you have 3 inspiration slots. One of them is locked, though. But since Bey's base trait is one that I would use anyways, I consider it having a bonus 3rd inspiration that a lot of times we wouldn't have. So for that reason, Bey is a very strong commander just by himself. But we already have a really nice concealment influence here. I think it's probably 5% when it's maxed, which is a very solid influence. Now, you'll notice Swirsky I have on there as well. Using Swirsky and Bey in conjunction with each other, as I am with this build, that's going to put you on par with the the Japanese destroyers in terms of concealment. So while the concealment's decent on these ships to begin with, using those two together, kind of elite tier detectability, which is very nice. And that kind of gives you a lot of leeway. Again, hunting those destroyers, part of the interaction in those fights is who spots each other first, or who spots the other ship first. Allows you to get the first shot in, allows you to start kiting away, which you're typically going to want to do in destroyer v destroyer engagements, allows you to kind of dictate when you want to disengage. So there's a lot of advantages on having very high concealment on these. So for that reason, I use these two in conjunction with each other. You could definitely swap Swirsky out. If I was going to swap out one of these two, I would probably swap him out and just kind of go with good detectability. Now the other one I have on is Gurren, which increases the AP pen. Again, we noted that the AP damage on these ships is strongest across the board. So getting those shells to penetrate, great value. You're going to increase your damage output greatly. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, great, he's got two commanders that I don't have as inspirations. What good is this build guide? Well, luckily the other ones are very strong. That were at least the next three, I believe. We'll kind of go over those. So you can keep those in mind. But Gurren, you're for sure going to get early next year when the Soviet lines are released. So keep him in mind if you want to come back to that once you get him, if you don't have the Gremyashi. I like using that a lot. I mean, if you can land these AP shells and get them to pen, massive damage from these guns. And by the way, that's going to help you Citadel ships too, because the armor is stronger at the water line. The Citadel armor is stronger than the upper hull, which is what you typically have to shoot without good penetration. So if you have access to these commanders, this is the build I have. I think it's very strong. I like it quite a bit. But if you don't, these next three I think are really upper tier, and then we'll have some extra options to consider. So first up, Sims. Those of you that follow my channel for a while know my trials and tribulations with Sims. I still don't have them, as you can see. You can use them on any destroyer. I mean, increasing the HP, that helps the destroyer class the most because it's a fixed value per tier. But because we have really strong HP, and if we want to enhance that characteristic by adding on Sims, you're going to have very sturdy destroyers that are not going to be easy to take out. So I would probably swap Swirsky out with Sims if and when I ever do get him, which as the time goes on seems increasingly less likely. At least it seems that way. But that's a very strong option. Next up, you got Burke. Increases the gun precision, the accuracy of the gun. So because I'm playing this build in these ships with the guns and focus, increasing that accuracy is very strong. You want to land those shots, they're going to be doing a lot of damage, and Burke is the man for that. So Sims and Burke, if those are the guys you have, very strong options. Next up, MADDEN, turret diverse, reload speed. Two things that we want to focus on. Again, the turret diverse, very poor on these particular destroyers that I'm focusing on. And the reload speed, because of the 150s, slow. You know, it's not as slow as the Japanese, but it's longer than the UK and US lines. So MADDEN, definitely. I mean, if you have any combo of these three and you slot them in as those two inspirations, I think you're going to have a very strong build with Bey. Now, these next four I don't think are as strong. Three of them I would definitely check out, though, and you can consider. But Togo is interesting for me. You have 4 consumables on these, at least tier 5, 6, 7 destroyers, which are the ones I'm most familiar with. Cutting down the reload time on all of those, well, that's actually fairly powerful. And while Togo's very low on my priority list to max, if I had him high level, I'd probably experiment with this, using him on the build, because, again, a lot of consumables, cutting down the reload time could be quite valuable. Halsey I put on here mainly as a warning. Increased AP damage. Well, we already have really good AP damage, right? So that sounds good on paper. But let's break down your typical game. Let's say you get half your damage from HE shells, a quarter from torps, and a quarter from AP. Obviously, it's going to vary by game and how you're playing the ships. But if you get 100k damage and a quarter of that's AP, you're getting 25,000 damage, and if you increase that by 5, 10, whatever it is, that's not that big of an increase. So keep that in mind. Again, the AP shell is very strong. You could use HALSEY. I'm not going to say it's the end of the world, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend him as strongly as a lot of these other guys. KINKAID, very interesting as well. Cutting down the sonar reload time. Now, again, sonar, the best currently available, and I believe is going to be the best available for the life of the game, at least in terms of the tech tree ships. So being able to cycle through those sonars quicker could be an interesting option. Again, I think there's stronger options, but you could play around with KINKAID, see what you think of that. And lastly, VIAN. This one I kind of bring up on all my destroyer builds. I don't know what to think about them. I mean, increasing the incoming shot dispersion means you're going to get hit less, and that's always an interesting option. Especially, here's why it's interesting for me on this line, because if you're fighting other destroyers 1v1, you're going to have pretty good odds in a straight 1v1, but if those ships behind them are supporting them, that's where that incoming dispersion is really going to be noticeable. If you have cruisers, battleships shooting at 10 kilometers, 10 kilometer plus, you know, those shots are much less likely to hit if you have this guy's inspiration on there. I've had mixed feedback talking to people that have experimented with him. Some say they don't think it's that effective, but my counter argument to them is, how would you know? Because the shots that you get hit by, you're going to get hit by anyways, and the ones that miss, you wouldn't know if it's due to this perk or not. So play around with VIAN if you got him. Let me know in the comments what you think of that guy. I like to get as much feedback about VIAN as I can. But those are kind of the interesting inspirations that are currently available for me that I would recommend considering. I have two kind of main goals with these commander builds. One, to kind of give you the baseline of how to think about the builds and how I think about them, and give you some advice in terms of that. But I also like to get a lot of comments on these. That informs my thinking, and the other viewers like to read through the comments and get other ideas, because I have my own perspective on the game, and I play the ships my own way. You guys no doubt play them differently than I do. So let me know how you're running Bay, inspirations, perks, all that sort of stuff. Very interested to see what you think. If you did like this video, please hit the thumbs up. New to the channel, you should consider subscribing. There's a lot of World of Warships coming all the time. Again, the comments, I want to see a lot of them below, please. And we'll see you guys all later. Alright, peace.